Hello and welcome back to another Infinity Nikki event update. Today we are reviewing the 2.2 Chromatic Beings Ever Bright Chinese New Year event that we get annually for Infinity Nikki. Spoilers for the event, obviously, but because my videos are always late, the spoilers doesn't really matter because this is now, I think, a whole patch behind. There is, as usual, going to be 3 parts to this video, so we're going to do the positives of the narrative, the negatives of the narrative, and then, of course, the update as a whole. There are 3 major parts to this entire main quest for this event, so I'm going to kind of just be breaking it down a little bit to quest by quest, but overall, I'm going to be just kind of grouping it all together. So let's go ahead and talk about the strengths first off, because I always like to start positively. As always with these Chinese New Year events, the production level is at an all-time high for every Infinity Nikki Chinese New Year event. Even the very first ones, even the 1.x ones, were always incredible in terms of the thought process, the integration of their own cultural influences, how they weave that together with the narrative. It's always great. Like, it's always great. And even if I know that I am missing like key cultural cues, and what I mean by that is I feel like there's a lot of folklore, there's a lot of tales, like fairy tales, or I don't know if it's fairy tales, folk tales, or cultural stories, or spiritual things, like things that are rooted in Chinese culture. I feel like I'm missing a lot of the context to a lot of these things, because it's on its own, it sounds like super random. Like in for example, Momo swallows like a jade and it's like in his tummy. And I feel like that's not random. I feel like there's probably some sort of like a mystical cat swallowing a jade and having the being protected in his tummy, and like I feel like that's probably from something or playing on some sort of like popular, culturally understood folk tale or spiritual tale or something. Like I feel like influences like that I don't get, like I miss those, which is fine. It doesn't affect my enjoyment or understanding of what's going on. But it just, as someone who isn't from this culture, a lot of these choices in the story feel random sometimes. I'm like, oh, what is that? Like, why are they doing this? Or like, I didn't know that was part of the lore, or stuff like that, when I'm pretty sure it's probably rooted in something cultural. So forgive me if I question something that happens in the story, and maybe some of you who are Chinese or know about Chinese culture are like, yeah, that's kind of like a thing, or that's like that's like a traditional kind of storytelling thing that happens in folk tales over there or something like that. Like, and feel free to tell me about that in the comments, because I actually love learning about different cultural stories. Like I love folk tales from different cultures because it tells you a lot about that culture and like the values of that culture. And so I think it's actually like my little nerd brain, I actually really enjoy it. Even if I don't understand it, I think it's really interesting and I love learning new things. So if there is points like that in this review, then go ahead and leave a comment. I'd love to learn and I'd love to get some context. But if I do criticize something and I'm like, this doesn't make much sense within the Infinity Nikki world, but it's rooted in like a Chinese culture thing, then just go ahead and let me know because I don't know. Anyways, the production level, the music, the visuals, the outfits, everything is just top notch. It's their own culture. It's their own celebrations that they are emulating in the story. So you can really feel the effort, the care, and the meticulousness in the way in which they try to present these Chinese New Year events. And 2.2 this year is no different. It is no different. The attention to detail down to the NPCs idling around the main city area, like the way they have NPCs interacting and sitting on roofs and kind of floating around, and the outfits that they all wear, down to NPC makeup, NPC hairdos, NPC relationships. It's all carefully selected and to create this very rich environment for this event story. And it makes me honestly very excited for the Linlong Empire whenever we get to that. And I had a similar feeling about last year's Chinese New Year event when we were in the scrolls, the paintings, the villagers, and the way in which you could feel the tradition, you could feel the culture in every step of that map, every NPC, every outfit, the environment itself, the nature, everything held hands to present the player this like very specific, rich experience inspired by their culture. And I feel like it's one of the reasons why the Chinese New Year events are so fun for me to play, because while obviously it's not my culture, and I do feel sometimes lost if there's a reference to something that is a traditional Chinese culture thing that people would get, right? I wouldn't get. It still doesn't like upset me. I think it's a learning opportunity for me, and I think it's fun. Everything looks great as usual. The music in this particular event was, I think, one of my favorites. The music is always good actually for like all Infinity Nikki content for the most part, not just Linlong themed or Chinese New Year events. Like all of the events, all the main story chapters have a really good use of music, whether it be like actually sung lyrics or it's just score music, so it's soundtrack music, right? There's no lyrics. They utilize both types of music really well, but in this specific one, you could really hear the cultural roots in the music, which of course makes sense. But it was still a pleasure to listen to, and because I actually play a lot of free-to-play open world gachas, I actually recognize now some of the sounds, the specific instruments. I couldn't tell you what they're called, but I do recognize a lot of the sounds now because I've heard it in a lot of the other games that I play when they're doing Chinese themed events or cultures, or even like games like Where Winds Meet, which is really rich in Chinese culture because it's set in a fantastical reimagining of historical China. But like I find myself recognizing these sounds, and it makes the experience just super fun and really immersive is what I'm trying to say. That same effort in the production is also mirrored in the narrative. You can feel that there is a lot of enrichment from their culture in the writing, like down to how the writing is structured, right down to how the stories play out. Everything feels infused with this very rich culture. And that's super fun for me because it feels unique. Even though we've never been to the Linlong Empire, technically, I feel that I am more aware of, like, to me, the Linlong Empire has more of an identity than Yitzhak does. And we're in Yitzhak. Like, if you were to ask me what are the main, like, influences in Yitzhak, or, like, what's the thematic core of Yitzhak, I legitimately could not tell you. I have no idea. It's, like, a million things. To me, Yitzhak is very scattered in what it's doing, both in its narrative implementation, its visual and lore implementation. It just feels all over the place. But again, we haven't finished the Yitzhak main quests yet. Like, they haven't fully released, so I'm gonna, hold my tongue on that until we finish them. But overall, I feel like if you ask me what's the thematic core of the Linlong Empire, we haven't even been there yet, but I could immediately write you a 7-page essay on the thematic core elements of this culture in Mirrorland, right? The Linlong Empire. And honestly, the Linlong Empire, even in Eastland, if you read, like, what I'm noticing is that the Linlong Empire is actually mentioned a lot in a lot of the little writings and stuff I'm finding in Eastland, like, oh, this Linlong scholar or this Linlong stylist who came here to explore something. Like, there's little snippets of them everywhere. In Wishfield too, this was the case. And so it seems that they're really building this up, which of course makes sense because the Linlong Empire is probably going to be a quintessential area because it's obviously the source of their culture, right? It's the fictionalized implementation of their culture. So of course they're going to make it their most enriched area with all of the real world influences present, which is fine. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I could tell you a lot about the Linlong Empire, even though we haven't even been there yet. So you can really feel how much effort there is in the writing, that they care about the characters, even the NPCs. They care about to how Nikki moves through this story, if that makes sense. There is a intentionality, I think is the word I'm looking for. There is an intentionality in how Nikki is expressed as a character in this event story, and in all of the Linlong Empire Chinese New Year event stories, honestly. There's this a very intentional way in which they present her. She feels familiar with these things, because I think it's implying that the world Nikki's originally from, right, her home world, right, where her mother lived and all that stuff, is in some sort of modern China or something. I don't know. But it's implying that this culture is very familiar to Nikki. Even though Mirrorland obviously is a brand new world to her, the Linlong Empire is very reminiscent of her home, which is interesting, and also gives this connection with Nikki that she doesn't really have in the other places that she goes, which makes her feel closer to these places, these NPCs, and these stories that are happening than maybe she would off the bat with, you know, a Wishfield, event or something like that. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I think specific to the Linlong Empire. And so that uniqueness is honored with each of these Chinese New Year events. And I think that's fine because it's consistent, right? It's narratively consistent. So there's nothing objectively wrong with it. And I personally think it's fun because I learn a little bit more about maybe Nikki's home, and also Nikki feels very highly invested in what happens in these Chinese New Year events, even though they can get a bit crazy, at least to me, so someone who isn't Chinese. Sometimes there is a overload of a lot of cultural context that I maybe don't understand. They assume that I should understand. Obviously, this is a game made by Chinese devs, initially for Chinese audience. I know it's global and it released global, but you know, there is sometimes certain aspects of the story where I'm like, oh, I feel like I can't keep up a little bit, so I have to do a little extra work. I don't mind doing that because I think it's fun. I like learning new things. And I think, you know, if you know anything about my content, I do not mind reading more to kind of get understanding of what's happening. And I'm not saying the main story of this quest is hard to follow, like, or I'm like, I don't know what's going on. It does get a little quick. Like, they do really pack in a lot of context, a lot of stuff, a lot of really philosophical shit at the very end in the last quest. The other quests build up to it. I'll talk a little bit more about this in the weaknesses section, but it does get really heavy. Not in terms of like serious, well, sort of, but like the density of what they're trying to articulate to you really ramps up at the end. I appreciate that they're actually going hard in and hammering down into like really cool, interesting, broader concepts about life and about what it means to exist and what being alive is. Like, what is being alive, right? What constitutes humanity even, right? What are the actions of a human? What does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to have free will and agency? What does it mean to pursue things that give you joy, right? These are the main themes of this event. And I thought that they were very beautiful themes. I thought it was really cool how it was implemented with the NPCs. That's another thing that I wanted to talk about, is that they had very compelling NPCs. There was like a brother-sister duo that we meet. The brother is secretly antagonistic because he's trying to be with his sister, save his sister, because of the accidental subjugation of all of the chroma faces, which are all of the essentially like supernatural beings of this area. And The lore I'll talk about in a second, because there's like a lot. This is a very lore rich event that I feel like actually alters, adds to fundamental rules of gods and divinity in Mirrorland, but we'll get to that in a second. But there was really compelling NPCs in how they express themselves, how Nikki interacts with them. There was also this young woman that we interact with who just really likes her special little hobby, but she's forced to be something else because each of these beings are supposed to essentially play out a specific archetype of person. They get these tokens and they have to act out the person the token dictates, and they're not allowed to pursue what they actually like as people. And this separates families, this separates friends. You know, it's forces them to behave in ways that don't actually make them happy, don't enrich their lives. And part of Nikki's role in this is to break this cycle and to allow these beings who are essentially trying to become human, right? It's like almost like this experiment, this divine experiment where they have these beings that aren't human. They were trying to copy the kind of cultivation humans can achieve through dreams and hard work and perseverance and just living their lives, right? Pursuing things that makes them happy, whether that be hobbies or being with their families and friends or loved ones, right? There is this idea of cultivation, which I am familiar with at this point. Again, I've played a lot of games made by Chinese devs at this point, so I feel like I understand this at least. And they've taken this concept of cultivation and kind of tried to integrate it into the magic of Mirrorland in a very interesting way. If you don't really understand the concept of cultivation, you'll probably be a little more lost, because that's really what was being kind of played upon. That was like a big cultural theme. And they're weaving it into like the rules of Mirrorland. So if you don't really know what cultivation is, or like what that concept is in Chinese culture or traditional folk tales and the history of that concept, you're probably lost as fuck. But it's essentially this, like, it's hard to explain, and I would rather you go look it up from someone who is actually Chinese to explain it to you, because I feel like my explanation is going to be very basic and not as accurate. But it's like this energy, this life energy thing, and humans are able to cultivate this, and then you can essentially ascend to a higher being, like a higher state of being. I'm not talking about Infinity Nikki specifically. This is like just the broader concept of cultivation. And it's something that divine beings have control over. It's something humans can access with their deeds or martial arts in a lot of stories, or, you know, pursuit of virtue and stuff like that. And it's something that they cultivate, and it's something that they grow. It's this very unique energy power type of idea. And so in Infinity Nikki, in this story specifically, these beings, these supernatural beings, this chromatic city of beings are essentially trying to echo and copy how humans can cultivate, right? And how they live their lives. And there's not really a focus on the power side of this concept, because I feel like you can approach the cultivating concept in a story more focused on the actual power dynamics or on the more like humanistic side. And I feel like the story focuses more on the human side of the cultivation concept, where we're focused more on what it means to be human, what it means to have family, what it means to care and love for the people in your community, and that the cultivation is just a side effect of living your life with integrity, essentially, is what it boils down to. And these beings are trying so desperately to copy that human way of life, you know, pursuing integrity and in small tasks every day. Like, they're not doing anything insane. They're not all emperors or crazy generals. Like, you don't have to be all of that to have integrity in your life and to cultivate meaning, right, in your life with the people around you, and find contentment in your own life, what you choose to do, your hobbies, blah, 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 blah. And I think that this story focuses more on the humanistic side of it rather than like the power trip stuff. And I think it suits the story more. And I think it suits the Infinity Nikki brand where it's about community. Every single chapter of the story, every new community she finds, her goal is not about how do I get more powerful? It's about how do I help these people? And through that desire, that altruistic desire, Nikki cultivates relationships with these people and care for them. She becomes part of their community, right? And through that bond and through her commitment, her devotion to sincerity throughout it all, right? Throughout whatever trials and tribulations she faces, her sincerity is her biggest strength, right? It's what connects her to everybody around her. And it's also what allows her to stay humble and to maintain this humility through whatever comes at her, right? And that's her biggest strength. And so it makes a lot of sense for this story about this greater divine cultivation experiment is what essentially it was implied to be at the very end. And again, we'll talk about the lore and the greater lore stuff in a second. But this quote unquote cultivation experiment, Nikki comes in and humanizes everything, right? She reminds everybody involved, well, specifically Chroma, who was the god of the chromatic beings of this area, that it's not about the power. It's not about efficiency in cultivating. It's not about how fast we can get the power. It's not about how powerful the power is, how perfect the power is. It is about the integrity of the human life, right? And that is what the focus is. And I really liked that. I thought that was very powerful messaging. I thought the NPCs all supported this theme. We have the brother-sister, we have the young woman who really wants to make lanterns, but she's forced to do something completely different. And you could see how much it weighs on her to be forced into something that she has no interest in, that kills the creativity in her because she's not allowed to express herself, essentially. And you see how all of these instances of the sister and the brother being split because they're not allowed to be brother and sister in this with their tokens, because there's the tokens cycle. So they get new tokens every cycle. And so the cycles have been speeding up more and more recently. And so they have to be these different types of people every time, faster and faster. And so this brother-sister duo, right, they're not allowed to be brother and sister. They're not actually even considered brother and sister in this cycle because their tokens don't say that they're for their family. And so you see how these two siblings who are family refuse to let the tokens dictate how they care for their family, right? How they care for each other. And it drives the brother to do, antagonistic things that messes with the system and the cycle, and Nikki has to investigate and everything. But at the end of the day, it's coming from a place of desperation to not be separated from his family. There's also this looming threat in the last section of the quest. It's built up where the chroma faces essentially cycle so many times. Some of them reach a point where they start to turn to statues because at the end, the game implies they turn to stone because every cycle, they lose more of themselves because they're forced to be something they're not, right? The tokens, instead of helping them act human, the tokens are actually stealing their agency and forcing them to lessen who they actually are. At least that's the theme that I picked up. If you have a different interpretation, that's valid as well. But that's how I felt. And also it was kind of implied at the end when they're talking about all the lore stuff, when Nikki's having the conversation with Chroma, which is the dear god. Speaking of the dear god, let's talk about the lore bombs that were dropped in this event, because there were lore bombs. I don't know if it was intentional or not. And I'll also talk about this in the weaknesses section because I do have some concerns, but let me praise it first. They introduced a very different type of divine god being in Mirrorland. So the whole city that Nikki goes to is a floating city of supernatural creatures that floats above the Linlong Empire. So technically we're floating above the Linlong Empire. And so all of these NPCs and all of this is rooted in Linlong culture and history. So keep that in mind. The Chroma God, there's this whole, without vomiting the entire summary of the story at you verbatim, the Chroma God was essentially tasked with overseeing the chromatic beings, quote unquote, cultivation, right? The evolution of these beings. And the cultivation that they collectively make, right, by living their lives according to the tokens, at least at first, right, it created this like huge group cultivation. So this energy, this magic that they all cultivated, fed into and supported this entire society. And because the tokens actually started to hinder and suffocate these creatures, right? It took their agency, it took away what made them human. Even though they're not human, they started to become human through the integrity of living their lives, but the tokens started to take that from them, right? So that power, that cultivation that they all have lessens over the years, and it weakens every year. And so the god overseeing all of this doesn't understand, right, why this is happening, and there's panic, and the god has disappeared. And so by the end, Nikki comes face to face with Chroma, and it's really interesting to have her literally have a discussion with the god. Now, my question is, and again, this is something I'll bring up as a concern as well. So there's two sides to this coin. I have to assume this is like a god on par with like the Wishing One, because the Chroma was spoken to, they were called a god. So I have to assume they are a god. I don't know if they are a lesser god or if there's tiers to this, because Chroma was a guardian of this city, but they weren't the creator of it. They're like, again, without getting into the story, they're like a twin, a copy of who originally made the area, at least to my knowledge. Again, if I'm wrong about that and I misunderstood, please correct me, but I'm pretty sure that was the case. So this is like a guardian god who doesn't really know the essence of humanity, but they're trying their best to grow the cultivation of this area, and they keep failing because they don't understand humanity, right? And then Nikki comes in and has like a face-to-face thing, and Nikki, through her journey, through the whole 3 quests of this event, is able to show Chroma what the value of agency and human life is, right? And why it's important that the cycle of the tokens be broken, because it's actually killing the agency and the breathing hearts, for lack of a better term, of these chromatic beings. It's suffocating them and it's killing them, right? It's why they turned to stone, because the system was supposed to help them, but it's no longer helping them. And so Nikki is able to convince this god that the tokens are unnecessary and that they're actually a hindrance to the evolution of these beings. So that's all really cool. I think it's really interesting that they just they literally just have Nikki one-on-one chatting with a god. Now, whether this is a lesser god or not, it's still a divine being that is connected intrinsically to the Linlong pantheon. Because I'm still not sure if each nation has their own pantheon of gods. In Wishfield, it's the Wishing One is also the Silvergale, right? So, but the Wishfield seemed to have one divine being who interacted with other, creatures and things that were special. But like in terms of gods, right, there was only ever one god spoken about. I don't understand if there must be multiple gods, I guess, for the Linlong Empire. I don't know. Not that that's bad. It's cool, but it's a huge lore bomb to drop, that we're expanding the divine understanding, right? What entities exist in Mirrorland, because the Wishing One famously is, according to everybody in Wishfield, right, whether they're talking about the Silvergale or not, is gone. And so their presence, there's remnants of the Wishing One kept alive, right? The Wishing One has legacy that is intrinsically built into Wishfields as a nation, right? The magic of the sprites and all of that stuff is the legacy of the Wishing One. But the god themselves, at least to our knowledge, as of right now, it does not exist. So it is interesting to finally meet a quote unquote living divine god. And it implies that there are more tied specifically to the Linlong Empire. That's really interesting. And I hope we learn more about that. I was vibrating in my seat. My little lore nerd brain was exploding. Again, I have to assume this was intentional, okay? Broadened the scope of the lore horizon like crazy. Like, it was always implied that there was multiple gods, right? Even in 1.x. But the fact that there's possibly a pantheon of gods specifically for the Linlong Empire implies that there's multiple gods possibly for each nation, and in Eastland too, actually, I don't really know what's going on over there. Mostly because we haven't finished the main quest stories. So, I actually don't know. I'm not being sarcastic or petty. Like, I actually don't know yet. But it is crazy how Nikki was talking one-on-one with a god. That's pretty insane. Before I move on to the weaknesses section and I talk about my possible concerns with how they presented this new lore, this lore bomb, if you will, I do want to say that we got main characters in the event. Our bestie Youyou was in this event. Girl, I was so happy to see him. And it's not like he was like, it's not like what they did to Giovanni in in the last Wishfield 1.x event, where he had his own side quest, which admittedly was given production, was given time. It was the longest of all of the side quests, but it was a side quest. Youyou, on the other hand, was like Nikki's partner throughout through each quest. He's there from start to finish. Love to see it. I like this change. Bringing main characters into the events is awesome. And also, it makes a lot of sense because he's a Linlong character, and we always knew that. And we learn about who he is and what organizations he's part of. And this also broadens the Linlong lore. He's part of this, like, not a spy network. They had like a cool other name for it, but he's part of this like shadow division of investigators, where essentially his job is to go around and make sure that any corrupted or actually literally the dark, capital letters, anything that is involved with that, whether it be an object or a person or environmental corruption or anything that has to do with the dark, his job and his organization investigates that and tries to cleanse it or tries to fix whatever the corruption is, right? He investigates, again, whether it be objects or people or environments, he's on it, which is really cool. And it's why he can do all sorts of like shadow magic. Again, we don't know much about it still, but it's cool to kind of like understand why he has such cool abilities that like Nikki can't even do, at least yet. Maybe she'll be able to do that once we get to the Linlong Empire. But I found it to be really fun to have Youyou along and to also have him part of this entire really rich lore experience, and to also have him expand the Linlong Empire lore too in a more practical way, because Nikki, like the main story of this quest was very much about divinity and cultivation, so very elevated concepts. But it was cool that Youyou brought this. He kind of grounded the story a little bit, kept us on our kept our feet on the ground a bit, and was able to provide some lore and some context to Linlong every day, right? The actual on the ground everyday stuff about the Linlong Empire and like what the Empire's values are, possibly. I mean, he's part of an organization, but I have to assume that his organization is part of whatever the leadership is of the Linlong Empire, that they are a part of giving his organization directions, or they communicate with them investigates the dark. And I have from what I've seen, the Linlong Empire, from what I've seen, read, and heard so far, the Linlong Empire are not oblivious. It's not an oblivious nation. They seem to be very forward thinking, but also in their investigations, they explore all the different nations. They have special kinds of technology. They're very well connected. So I have to assume that this is like shadow investigation organization, is intrinsically connected to whoever's in charge in the Linlong Empire, which we don't know. There's not been the name of an emperor or empress. There's not been anything like that. We haven't even gotten a title name like that. Like, there's not even been a mention of, oh, the empress said, or anything like that. Like, so I have genuinely no idea what the political head or heads of the Linlong Empire are, but it was cool that Tan Yo-Yo was giving us more information about the aspects of the empire and what maybe to expect going into it someday, whenever that is. But I loved having Tan Yo-Yo around. He's still one of my favorite characters, even though we interacted with him very, very little in the original 1.x main story, and he's not been in Eightsland at all. It's very fun. Very, very, very fun to have him along again. He's funny. I think the way the voice actor portrays this character is just very entertaining. And the character itself and his role as Nikki's like investigation partner was very fun. And I think it was nice to actually spend an extended period of time with this character and not just like, go talk to the character and leave, which is what happened in 1.x. But it was nice to actually like get to know him a little bit by investigating with him. And we work together, and him and Nikki have like a rapport now. They have like banter now. And it's nice. It's just nice that Nikki builds relationships with the characters in the world, because that makes it feel like a real story. Where we have characters that mean something to Nikki and to the world and are connected, right? It's just more plot threads, more connections, which is always good. So very happy to have seen Tan Yo-Yo. Very excited to have learned about what his deal is, right? What his job is, what he does for a living, and his possible place in the Linlong Empire being elevated. I think I kind of guessed that even in 1.x because of his clothes, the way he talked about just the way he talked, and also the way he spoke about what he did, even if it was, he was talking about the Flame Festival, but like the way he spoke about debt and things like that, like, I don't know. I kind of felt that he was always kind of like a elevated member of wherever he came from, which in this case is the Linlong Empire. So anyways, very excited to learn more about him in the future. I don't know when we'll see him again, but was very happy to spend some time with Tan Yo-Yo. Finally. Finally. Okay, now let's switch over to the weaknesses section. I'm going to just start off with the concerns I have about broadening the lore. I don't have a problem with it inherently, of course. Of course I want more lore. Of course I want to expand. Of course I want more context. I think the game needs to constantly expand, constantly evolve in order to remain interesting, to give us new narrative, new conflict that's compelling, right? That we care about, that's interesting, that has long-term consequences and benefits possibly to Nikki. These are good things. Right? I'm not complaining about these things, but I am a little concerned because we have a pretty mixed bag when it comes to the writing of this game. I feel like the 1.x main story chapters, the writing feels very different than the 1.x events that we got. Now, Eightsland's writing to me is, I'm going to say what I said earlier, is that it's completely all over the place. I don't know. I couldn't tell you what the thematic core is, really. It's like a million different things. I don't know what the direction of I don't know where the game's going. I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes that's a good thing, right? But you're just really like, I don't know what's going to happen. And that can be very exciting. But I feel a little trepidatious, a little concerned, not knowing what the direction is, because the 1.x main story quests had such intentional direction. Whether you liked them or not, okay, objectively speaking, the main story chapters of the 1.x story was very intentional, very direct. It had very tight writing. So everything wove into something else. It was connected with the lore deeply, and everything fed into something else, right? It was tight writing, objectively. Again, if you didn't like it or didn't care for what was the story that was being told, that's different, and that's fine. That's your opinion. But objectively speaking, from like a critical standpoint, the writing was tight. Was it perfect? Of course not. Nothing's perfect, but it was tight. So it all had intentionality. It all was going towards one single thematic narrative goal. Now in Eatsland, that's not the case. I don't know what the fuck's going on. I don't know what the point is, where we're going with it thematically. Like, I'm not really sure where we're going or what the point is. And since we're still so early, like, again, I'm holding off on the real criticism, but my concerns with this event specifically is that we're in a very unstable place, in my opinion, with the writing, with Infinity Nikki in Eatsland update as a whole, right? The 2.x update. We have now dropped into the whirlpool this event, this lore bomb. We've just dropped into the pool. And I just am worried it's going to explode everywhere. I like that we've expanded the lore. I just don't know if it's going to be followed up on properly in terms of consistency. I know the Linlong lore and like Wishfield lore and Eatsland lore all have individuality, right? They're all sort of contained within themselves, but they all should weave together within Mirrorland, right? They all have to make sense within Mirrorland because they all exist in the same universe. They all exist in the same world. So there has to be some sort of connective tissue that, even though these different places have maybe their own pantheons, like the Linlong Empire, there might be multiple gods here or multiple divine beings in the Linlong Empire. We still don't know everything about Wishfield. I know we ended the 1.x event, or I should say, we don't know everything about the Heartcraft Kingdom, which is the kingdom that Wishfield is in. We haven't even seen the queen of the Heartcraft Kingdom yet. We haven't seen any of the major political or possibly divine aspects of the Heartcraft Kingdom, right? The wishing one who was spoken about in Wishfield, right? We learned about them, but my point is, I'm just worried that we're not going to honor all of these very unique pantheons or gods or histories well. Like, I'm worried we're not going to weave them together in a way that makes sense, or in a way that's consistent at the very least. And I'm not saying each nation has to have the same layout in terms of like how they approach their pantheons or gods or leaders or magic systems. Like, they can differ, right? That's totally fine. In fact, I think that's good if they're all unique. But I worry that we've now have this incredible lore bomb where Nikki literally spoke face to face with a god, literally. And I'm not sure if that's going to be carried over properly. Hopefully. And again, this is why it's a concern. I'm not sure if it's not a criticism yet because they haven't messed up yet. But I am a little concerned because in the past, I just feel like the consistency in the writing is a little poor. So I am just voicing a concern, okay? And I think it could possibly be a weakness going forward. Was it a weakness in this event? No. So do with that information what you will. I don't think the lore that was dropped negatively affected this story. In fact, I find it very exciting, which is why I spoke about it in the strike section. But yeah, I'm a little concerned about the consistency moving forward. Hopefully that is not an issue. And it's just remains me being paranoid, and it doesn't actually develop into a problem. Another minor criticism I had, and I did mention this earlier, at the very end of these quests, so the last quest in the trilogy of quests we play for this event, the ending is very dense. It kind of vomits really heavy, deeply philosophical, highbrow kind of concepts at you. And I wasn't lost. And also because I have an understanding of cultivation as a concept, so I felt like I was able to keep up. There was a possibility that someone would play like, what? Because it really does throw like a lot of information at you, and not just the NPCs or like chroma or like the narrative throwing heavy philosophical shit at you all at once, like sentences you have to like normally like break down and think about for a second to like really get impact. But also Nikki is also sharing how she feels, which is good. Thumbs up. Like that's not what's bad, but it's just as a player, you're having to chew on not only the philosophical stuff that you're being shown all at once, all at the very end, but also Nikki's thoughts. And she's also like talking, and you're doing this like little mini game. I was like, my brain was scattered, so I was like, I have to hear what she's saying, even though she was speaking in English. I was still like trying to really process what she was saying, and also process the philosophical bombs that they were dropping about life and humanity. And again, very interesting. And I could tell that there was lots of thought put into the concepts being presented, right? There was lots of heart in the story, which is good. And I liked that Nikki was actually verbalizing what she was saying. This is good. I've been wanting this. I like when Nikki talks about her thoughts, how she processes what we experience. And because it makes it feel like it impacts her, right? And if it's impacting our main character, we have to pay attention to it, right? As players or consumers of the story, because our main character feels something about it. So it encourages the players to feel too, right? That's just how stories work. When your main character is affected by something, the consumer of the story automatically is drawn to care about whatever that problem is, right? Nikki having an opinion, adding her own thoughts on top of the philosophical shit we were hearing, it was great. But I feel like it happened all at once, all in this condensed package at the very end, when it was really all just dropped on our heads. And it felt a little like overload. Again, I kept up. I was able to kind of understand what was going on, but I did feel like, oh, wow, this is all happening all at once, very fast. They're giving us this information in a very compact way, very quickly. Again, it's not the worst thing, because we're actually getting quality ideas, right? The themes are actually good. The themes are well thought out. And Nikki, the main character, gives a shit about what's happening, right? That's good. That's good. I just think that it was very compact. It happened all at once. It would be hard for some people to keep up or to process the way I think the game wants us to process. Because when you're talking about high, really elevated concepts like humanity and the meaning of life, right? I know it sounds cheesy, or I should say tropey or cheesy, to have in a story like, what does it mean to be alive? Like, I think if you present that kind of concept well, or that theme well, it actually can be deeply moving. And I think that this story actually was built on that question. Like, what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to live? Not just eat, sleep, repeat, do things that even if you don't care about them, you still do things that's still considered living, right? The point is, what is the human part? What is the human experience of life, right? What is the purpose? How do we live our lives with integrity? What is the value of that, right? That's the highbrow, elevated concept, thematic concept of the story, which is great. But the thing with introducing these philosophical questions into a theme or a story is that you have to make sure you let it simmer and you give your players the chance to process something like that. If you continuously throw the, theme after big question, philosophical thing, one after the other, tumbling within 5 minutes, like the last 5 minutes of the story was really compact with stuff, not just philosophical stuff, but like lore as well, talking about the history of the god and the Linlong Empire and the chroma faces and the cultivation and the meaning of being alive and humanity. Like, it was literally garbling all of those concepts in the same 5 minutes, and it was just throwing all of it at the player. And I think that with higher elevated kind of themes like that, it's best to let the audience process them. You give your players a little more time to process what you're asking them to consider, right? Because that's the point. When you present these themes to consumers, whether you're writing a book or a manga or a game or a movie or a TV show, whatever, right? If you're the creative and you're presenting these themes to your consumers, you want to make sure that they get the chance to actually consider the deep philosophical things you want them to consider, right? You put these things in your story because it's impactful and it's moving, and it's something that no matter what kind of story you're telling, it connects us all, right? Doesn't matter what culture you're from or place or walk of life. Everybody has considered what it means to be alive, right? This is something that is universal, something that anyone and everyone can relate to, right? Despite whatever different experiences people have in their lives, this is something that at some point everyone has considered their existence, right? So that's a wonderful thing to put in a story, and I think it works in the narrative. I just think that they did overload a little bit at the end. And I'm not saying that the rest of the 2 other quests didn't build to this. It did, but they kind of lore bombed everything all at once on top of all the big philosophical stuff. I should say philosophical revelations, right? We're getting to the deep stuff. And also they're dropping lore on us too at the same time. It's like all happening at once, and it happens in like 5 minutes. And so it kind of leaves you, I was left reeling after the quest finished, because I was like, holy, well, after that sequence, because we have this little cute hot pot scene with the NPCs of the story as the last kind of like epilogue scene. But like right after that, lore's ending the climax of the quest, I was like, I stood there for like 2 minutes, like I had to like think about what I just saw, like what I just heard, what I was being told, right? What the theme was, what the story wanted me to consider, to understand, to chew on. And I was having to sort out lore, sort out philosophical themes, and maybe not everyone's brain works like this. I don't know. Maybe it's just me, but it was kind of a lot at the end. I know I'm repeating myself at this point, but I'm not trying to be too critical, because I actually really liked the meat of what they were giving us, right? The actual insides, right? It was good, and the intent was good, and I think the overall presentation was good, and I enjoyed myself, and I felt something playing the quests. I felt connected to this place, to these NPCs, to the story. I felt invested in the emotional journey Nikki had with these characters, with this circumstance of events. So I liked it. I just think that if I maybe nitpicky, but it was very compact, a lot of info at the very end that I think they maybe could have spaced out a little more. Maybe in the last quest. Like if they wanted to save the big revelations for the last quest, that's completely fine. I just think maybe we should have dropped the lore and then dropped the, Nikki's reaction, then dropped the big philosophical stuff, all in different instances, little mini climaxes throughout that last quest, instead of dropping it all at once within 5 minutes. That's all I really have to say about narrative weaknesses. I'm not going to go ahead and talk about the update as a whole now. Exploring any Linlong inspired area, like all the Chinese New Year maps that we have gotten in Nvidia Nikki, I have always had a fucking blast exploring. I love it. I love it because the environments feel so characterized. And what I mean by that is that there is obviously it's because they're drawing from their own culture. So there's like obviously a lot of attention to detail, a lot of personal experience, personal knowledge with the traditions that they are inspired by, right? That they're emulating into this fictional world. So that really shines through in any Linlong content. The chromatic city, this entire area, and also the secret area that's unlocks in the third quest, all of it's gorgeous. And it makes me so excited to eventually see the Linlong Empire in its full majesty. Like, I can't imagine how amazing the designs are going to be, from the cities to the nature. It's going to look great. I am very excited. But the city itself was so fun. It's so beautiful. The little parade of the fish floats, to the fireworks, to the NPCs, how they're idling around the town, like exploring all of that was so much fun. And maybe I'm a little biased because I had the deer outfit, so I was able to just Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer fly around the map. So maybe that affected my enjoyment of it. I'm not sure. Maybe people who didn't pull for that outfit had a different experience exploring, but to me it was so much fun. It was so magical, and I really enjoyed not just the architecture and how unique and how much identity the city had, but also the NPCs. And I liked the mini games. The hot pot mini game was so fun and cute. I like that kind of stuff, so I didn't mind it, you know, because you have to kind of you had to dedicate a bit of time to it to kind of get all the diamonds and benefits out of it. But I liked it, so I didn't mind. And I think the little hot pot, like, it's cute. I love hot pot, and I liked the fact that they built these mini games around the themes of the story, which was, of course, the meaning of life. And within those, the major mini themes identified under that umbrella, right? That umbrella theme was family, community, right? The bonds that we make with people are the stuff of life, right? We have our own pursuits of what gives us joy, but the bonds of our community, whether that be friends, family, lovers, children, whoever, right? All of that makes us who we are and connect to us. And hot pot, right? There's this, again, I could be wrong, but from what I understand of the culture of hot pot is that it's a group meal activity. It's something that you do together with family or friends or whoever, right? It's not a solo meal type thing. Like, you have hot pot with your community. And so I think it was very fun that even on this level, they were creating mini games around not just traditions that were inspired by foods and things from the Chinese culture, obviously, and they were putting it into the Linlong Empire and you know, the Maryland as a whole. But it's built on this concept of community and family and friendship and enjoying the time you have with others in your community. Like, I don't know. I think even the mini games had a thematic level to them. And I love that. I love it. I love it so much because it makes everything feel so consistent. Everything supports itself. It's chef's kiss. I love that shit. I love when games do that, when they take the narrative and the thematic core of the story and implement it in the world building, implement it in the actual gameplay. Like, I love it. It's so satisfying. And it makes for a good experience because everything supports, you know, everything holds hands. All of the aspects of the game work together to give you this very cultivated experience, right? They've made this experience piece by piece, and they want you to experience it this very specific way and give you a very specific feeling, and it's great. It's great. So I actually really liked the mini games. I thought they were cute. I thought they were fun. I had a blast doing them. So I wasn't like tired of it. I understand how some people could or were not into the whole hot pot mini game. But again, I like the thematic tie-in to the rest of the story, to the world building of this new map. I thought it was fun. I liked that the NPCs that we served at the hot pot table were like people that we actually met throughout the story of the quest. And I thought that was just cute. It's like a cute way to tie in the world of this little area, this world building of this area to a mini game. Like, that kind of attention to detail, to me, it deserves kudos. It deserves its recognition because they didn't have to. They could have just had random NPCs, but they chose to integrate NPCs we interacted with in the story of the event in the little mini game to show up, and we can serve them hot pot, and it makes it really feel like you're serving a community. This is a tight-knit community of creatures, and it gives them meaning. Anyways, I know there's always a lot of pressure when they release 2 5-star outfits at the same time, but this is something they do for every Chinese New Year event, every like major update. They do this sometimes, but I always know that there is an increase of pressure that players sometimes feel. The FOMO increases, obviously, because they want, you know, the dresses and the outfits, and that's of course a negative. And people who don't have or don't want to spend the money to get both, it can be frustrating, and I completely understand that. Even though I'm in a place to, you know, be lucky enough to get both if I wanted both, which I did, and was able to get both, I understand that it can be frustrating and feel bad. Just, it feels like shit when you can't get what you want. That is always something to consider when they do run double banners. And I think it can affect the experience because the dresses are the whole point of the game. And even though they are technically cosmetic, it's like the whole point of the game, right? And especially these 2 outfits had very interesting abilities, right? The deer outfit, you can literally, I know it's region locked. I mean, you can still go into the deer and like Eats Land, but it's kind of, honestly, it's kind of hard to navigate because you can't jump with the deer outside of this map. So it kind of works, but if you're caught on a rock, or like a hill or a bush or a tree stump or something in Eats Land, like you have to do like you have to like kind of fight with the directionality of the deer mechanic of how the deer moves to like get around the obstacle. So it's not very smooth outside of this area. It's not bad. It's still fun, but it's not as smooth as it is obviously in this map, where you can literally just go up into the air, you can stay on the ground, you can do whatever you want. And of course, the other outfit, the gorgeous dress, you could change Nikki's face, which can be super fun if you're into taking pictures and things. So I understand that they were really pushing the FOMO with these 2 outfits because they had actually really fun abilities. One was a mobility ability, and then of course a kind of visual change to Nikki's face and her expressions, which a lot of players have been asking for, like with the poses. I think people were like, oh, I would like to have Nikki have expressions, right? We can change her expression per pose. Like that would be really nice to be able to control her expressions. And of course, and then they release a 5-star outfit where you can change her expression. I understand that FOMO doesn't feel very good. And I would feel disingenuous mentioning it, even though it's not something I was fortunate enough, privileged enough to be able to have both, so I can experience both. But I understand that that's probably not the norm, and I need to mention it because I feel that is fair to mention as a negative downer onto this event, is that if you are unable for whatever reason to access or get both outfits, it can kind of ruin the fun a little bit. So I needed to mention that. And I think that just goes hand in hand with the monetization of this game being as bad as it's been. It's not changed. I unfortunately do not see it changing. It is what it is. But I think in terms of the gameplay mechanics of this update was very fun, like the mini games. And there was also this like mural side quest that I actually really enjoyed, where you like find this mysterious woman in this cave and you help her essentially refurbish this like old mural that of course it's very reminiscent of like the ancient murals in China that I have seen pictures of, and that also Where Winds Meet has taught me a lot about this, where there's lots of emphasis on murals like this and how culturally rich they are in preserving history and all that stuff, which is great. And I thought it was a cute, nice little nod to their culture to include something like that. And again, I'm a history nerd IRL, as well as being into creative writing and stuff. So I love when there's like actual historical things that support the fiction in people's worlds. I think it's very fun. So I thought that was cute. I appreciated that little mural side quest and Nikki kind of bringing it back to life and kind of honoring this forgotten piece of the Linlong Empire. Again, it just made me more excited to see the Linlong Empire when we eventually get there. I assume it's going to be big. I mean, again, like we haven't even seen all of the Heartcraft Kingdom, so who knows how big the Linlong Empire is going to be. It made me excited, as all of these Chinese New Year events do, to eventually see the Linlong Empire in its full glory. So thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. If you did, as always, I very much appreciate you spending your time with me. Again, I'm sorry this is so late. It is what it is. I have so many, I think I've bitten off more than I can chew in terms of like the things that I create content for, but like I don't want to not create content for the things that I am creating content for. Like all the games that I play that I have Let's Plays for, or I do like narrative reviews for, like with this game, I don't want to not do that because it makes me so happy to do it. And I'm behind because I'm in school, I'm in college, and I work too on top of it. So like I just maintaining my free time and also my mental health is a bit of a juggle, and it can be a struggle sometimes, but I am not behind on updating things because I don't care. I actually do care. I'm just working stuff out on my own. So I am sorry it is late, and I am sorry that I am so behind all the time on like everything, but I promise you it's not because I don't care. I wouldn't even bother making anything if I didn't care. So, and I also love hearing your guys' thoughts on what the different stories and experiences in this game, like what they mean to you and like how it affects you, because that's just fun. It's part of being in a fandom. I like hearing how people experience a story that I experienced, and maybe they have a different experience than me, and that's cool, and I like to hear about it. So go ahead and tell me what you thought down below if you would like to. All my socials are down in the description, so go ahead and check those out if you want to. If I don't see you live on Twitch, then I will see you in the next one.